All right, welcome back. We're really at our last section right now, and we want to talk about how do you get started? How are you going to start implementing this ministry in your church or in your community? And hopefully after viewing all these videos online or however, that you will begin tutoring immediately. There's no reason to have to wait a certain amount of time until beginning. Begin as soon as you possibly can, when it's convenient for you and your tutors and your students to gather together in the location and to begin tutoring. The more you tutor, the better you'll become. The more you'll understand what's happening. And then you can always go back and review and refresh your skills by looking at these videos again. They're always going to be available to you. Isn't that nice? I hope you enjoy it. Now, I would like to have you consider with me some of the questions that I've been asked over 20 years of doing this ministry, so that you know where we are headed in this direction, because I know that you and I cannot communicate with one another unless you want to use email, and then we can communicate that way. So I have written some questions on the board about how you get started. And I hope you don't wait. Again, as I mentioned before, I hope you don't wait too long. Start immediately. You've already been through all the videotapes and you've been working with your students, so just continue to have that ministry going. But let's ask some of these questions and let me answer them for you so that you know what's ahead. One of the most common questions asked of me is, how long does it take to complete the entire course? Now, there's only 18 lessons, and you take several lessons, class sessions to get through each lesson. So I am sort of generalizing by saying it might take you as long as 6 to 7 months. If you have a low intermediate or a general class of not a whole lot of students and they're quick learners and you're meeting frequently, it should take you upwards to 7 months to get through the first book. Then probably another 7 or 8 months to get through the second book, and the same for the third book. So it will take you almost 2 years to get through, or a little bit longer to get through all 3 books if you move at a constant rate. So how you set up your ministry in your location, in your community or church is up to you. We will resource you, we will help you and encourage you, but you will have to set it up that will best fit the convenience of both your teachers and your students. Then the next question is how often should our classes meet? And sometimes I don't like the word classes because it pictures in our mind a very formal class situation like in a school or college, university, and quite often your learning sessions will be in someone's home, in their living room, or in your living room, or your kitchen, whatever you may be teaching for that night. Or you may be taking your class down to the mall or to a shopping center or a marketplace, and you're teaching them certain objects and certain dialogues and conversations that they will have in these specific locations. You don't always have to meet in one place all the time. And I encourage you to go out on field trips and use the English out there. But how long should you meet? How often should we meet? Well, quite often I find that like a bell curve. Somebody used to say that, learning is like a bell curve. And as you start, the learning process gets really strong. And as you meet once a week, you're on the upward grade. And between one day of the week to the next, a lot of learners forget, they're back into their first language, and they lose a lot of English. But if they meet twice a week, the curve gets up higher. And then if they meet 3 times a week, they probably peak out at 3 times a week. And then anytime over that, 4 times a week or 5 times a week, well, there isn't really any more learning unless they are using it every day out in the marketplace. So at least 2 to 3 times a week would be ideal, and I would encourage you to try to strive for that, but I recognize that whatever your students and whatever your teachers, whatever is the most convenient for them, you'll have to meet when you can. And so if you meet once a week, I would encourage you to spend almost 3 hours together with a break and maybe 2 breaks in between your time together. If you want to meet twice a week, then you may only need to have an hour and a half twice a week, which is the same amount of time, 3 hours. If you meet 3 times a week, then you only have to get together for an hour. So you can arrange it so that if you are teaching in a person where they are working, like a restaurant or a hardware store or in a plant of some sort, and you're teaching the people their English, then it may be twice a week, once a week, whatever, and you have to gauge how long they can be involved and interact with the lesson. So determine on that. You have to determine how long it is that you meet. But I just wanted to tell you how people learn and how long they can retain. You don't want to constantly be reviewing. Then, where should we meet? Well, this is a church-based ministry, and it may well be that the people that you are working with, your students, belong to a church where they speak their own first language. And so you may want to, I encourage you even more so, that your teachers will go to that church and meet where they are familiar with. If you're working with people who do not attend a church in any way, they have a different religious background, then you may want to meet in their apartment or have them come to your apartment. It's not always necessary to meet in the English-speaking church if that's where you're meeting, because they may feel more comfortable being in their own home. So I'd encourage you, and it's a lot easier for 1, 2, or 3 tutors to go to an apartment complex or a place where there are many students rather than having all those students try to find transportation and a way to get to your church. So I would recommend that you go out and meet in homes and community centers, wherever it's possible for the most students to be able to come together. All right? Just don't try to force a large group to come to one location where they have to work out public transportation. Okay, so where should you meet? Now, it's also important to ask the question, people ask, well, what size class should I have? How many students should be in my class? And what I normally recommend is that you have at least a 6-to-1 ratio between students and teachers. And if you have a helper or 2, I've been in a class where there were 4 teachers and about 14 or 15 students. And so when they had to break up to do special sound like pronunciation or some grammar, they were able to have a smaller class working one-on-one. And this will also answer the question about different types of student skill levels in the same class, because quite often you may have 12 students total, but only 1 advanced student and maybe 2 or 3 intermediate students, and all the rest are beginners. And you can have them all together, but then one teacher can work with the advanced, one can work with the intermediate, one can work with the low level, and help them each in their specific need. And so I would encourage having several levels, as long as it's not low-level beginners and very advanced, and we'll talk about that. But if you have some that are very close together, to include them so they can hear each other's types of English. And the more advanced can help the lower level, and they can each really feel a part of the class and encourage one another. Now, if you have a real high advance who's come from their background, they've learned English in school, in their public school or a private institute, English institute, and they don't want to spend time always reviewing what they already know, then you will need to have a separate class just for them. So I would encourage you to interview your students ahead of time to find out what skill level they are, and then put them in a class that matches their need. And that means you'll have to train some more tutors maybe to be able to have enough tutors to teach that class. And that's why we have this videotape. So you can do that no matter where you're living in this world. Okay, that's nice to have the internet, isn't it? So the class size should be equal to at least 6-to-1 ratio. I wouldn't get any more than that, or else you will be overwhelmed, and unless you have a lot of training, a lot of experience and background, and then you just take the number of students that you feel comfortable with. But don't overwhelm a brand new tutor or teacher with too many students that they feel uncomfortable with. Always team teach. I always encourage team teaching. Team teachings will also decide the class size. All right? It's more fun to team teach, and I can't say that enough. All right. We talked about different students in the same class, and quite often you will have a husband and wife, and maybe a mother with some children or some teenagers that want to be in the same class. And that's fine. I have no problems with that. The only thing you have to be careful is that if the husband or the spouse has a much greater command of English than his mate or her mate, then you might want to put him in a different class, because I found out that quite often one will start correcting the other in the midst of the class, and pretty soon that causes some friction, and otherwise they're learning together. And you can manage that as you begin to start your classes, and hopefully you will have sufficient number of classes of different skill levels so that they can move gracefully into the next class. A lot of people ask about certificates. Do you hand out certificates? And let me talk about how important it is to have this ministry integrated into your local church. As your students move through and have command and skill in conversational English and reading, and why not celebrate it in the church? And in that case, you would want to maybe create a certificate that comes from your church, done by computers or whatever, that you can hand the students for completing a certain amount of English. It could be that they complete book 1, or they get through the first 3 lessons and they've completed it successfully, and they're interacting and they've learned some things, and then you celebrate that in a church service and have them celebrate and give them the certificate in front so everybody can applaud and be a part of this ministry. And then they finish certain portions of each of the books, they can have certificates. Now, for teachers, for you who are being trained as tutors, if you want to have certificates, then again, you can talk to Literacy and Evangelism, and if there is a Literacy and Evangelism person in your neighborhood, in your region, who can hand you and give you certificates and come and participate in the workshop or see what your classes are doing, then maybe they can offer you certificates. Otherwise, I would encourage your church to hand out certificates for your teachers if that's what they wish. If you're in a different country, and I realize that outside of North America, certificates play a very key role in the progression and the progress of you as a person within the community. And this is where, again, the regional director will have to give you that certificate. Supplemental materials. There are lots of materials on the internet. Be free to look at them, and we have a little phrase, if it works, use it. If you try a different technique, use it. Maybe your church would like to have talk time, which is a more informal time where they meet once a week for 2 or 3 hours or however long with some refreshments, and all you're doing is conversing. No books, no study, no practice session, you're just conversing. And you can learn more about talk time. Then I want you also to know that as you are progressing in your ministry, we want to know what is happening with you. What is God doing in your ministry at your church? And I would strongly recommend that. Would you please write us, email me. It's right in the front of the book of Using Everyday English. And write us and tell us what God is doing. Everything from the progress that your students are making, those who are sharing their faith, whatever. And we would like to know, what is working well and what areas of the work that you're having difficulty with, so that we can help you in overcoming that and making it a more efficient and effective tutoring ministry. All right? Would you do that? We appreciate it. Now, if you have any questions please refer to the person who is leading this workshop on the internet. And if you have any other questions, again, my name is in the front of the book, Using Everyday English. And also, you can also write Literacy and Evangelism International by just saying info@literacyinternational.net. And write and ask your questions and get information for supplies as well. All right? I hope you've enjoyed our time together. I know I have. And I look forward to hearing from you and what God is doing in your language ministry, the English language ministry of your church. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.